Hello, this is my project on adolescent colorist bias in relation to skin tone. In this project, what I'll be tracking is the relation between a participant's own skin tone and their resulting colorist bias related through implicit bias. What is implicit bias? Well, implicit bias is a form of bias that is unintentional and automatic through the unconscious mind inside a human. This is not intentional by a person, and a person should not be blamed for their implicit bias. An example of this would be a study by Professor Greenwald and Panaji, and explicit bias is represented by people believing that fame should not be associated with only men or women, and that's what they told professors and other researchers, but implicitly it was shown that they believed that fame was related to men. How did they track this implicit bias? That was through implicit association tests. Implicit association tests are the leading and only way to track implicit bias within people. In this study, I extensively used implicit association tests on participants to track how their implicit bias changes in relation to other variables. Those other variables that I'll be testing are apparent in my study's research question. How can we use IATs, or implicit association tests, to detect if implicit color bias changes in relation to an individual's skin tone? Essentially, what I wanted to track here was if a person's own skin tone could change the way they viewed skin tone through implicit bias. So, for example, would a person with darker skin favor or reject lighter skin implicitly? That's just one example of how skin tone can affect implicit bias, and that's what I wanted to test. I did this through my method, which contained two parts. One part contained the implicit association test as stated earlier, which is an online test that would track response times to track a participant's implicit bias, and the second part would just be a skin tone scale called the Monk skin tone scale to track participant skin tones. With these two parts, we essentially correlated these two parts and tracked how these two different parts related. In the result, it was shown that people with more moderate skin tones had less and less bias compared to those with more extreme skin tones.